Dominic, can I ask you, you've got your own production company. Are you planning for future buying a novel rights of a writer, maybe making a film yourself, moving into more of the film away from television?
There's always something on the go. I do like looking at adaptations because I like to start with something rather than a blank page. So sort of yes. I've never really. I found TV has been very kind to me, and film is now a lot harder to do than it was in the old days. You know, the sort of middle ranking, sort of middle budget films don't seem to be really viable anymore. It's like $1, $2, $3, $4 million. You can do that, or you're making Marvel. You know, and you're into 100 million plus.
Yeah.
And the sorts of things that I love as a potential filmmaker, which is that bit of me is quite different, I would think, from my sort of TV track record, which is quite sort of crowd pleasing and easygoing. Because I think TV is a mass medium, you know, and you're fighting for eyeballs, and obviously film is too. But it feels to me like there's a certain sort of role for the sorts of films that my brother made, really, you know, which were sort of neither blockbuster budget, but they were well funded. They weren't $5 million films, and those films are hard to come by.
The English Patient.
The English Patient, exactly. I mean, Anthony used to say that in the early 2000s that he wouldn't be able to make a film like that anymore, which I thought was him being over dramatic. But actually he was right, and certainly by the end of the 2000s that sort of film had all but disappeared. And we have a thriving movie business here, as you know, but most of it's in service to American funded production. So I think you know, maybe you go to America and you know, sort of learn that trade. And I've often thought that, you know, if you wanted to really be committed to your line of work, you should go where that business is most thriving, right?
Yeah.
But I'm British, and I don't, you know, I've got children. I don't much want my kids to grow up in LA, and I don't hate LA like some people do. I think it's got its uses, and got my niece lives there, and I stay with her when I'm there, and she's entirely bought into and part of the fabric of American movie production. But when it's come to it, I've managed to hold on to my European, you know, stay British, and you know, that by and large it's safe over there. But whenever you see a school shooting, you think, oh my God, you know, it would be quite a different experience dropping your kid off to school in America than it is dropping them off here. You know, the worst that's going to happen is they might, you know, score some drugs and get themselves into trouble with the police. But unlikely to be crouching under a desk, you know. I don't know, and obviously that's only a sort of part of a kind of cultural difference, that, you know, we're just different here. We just are. And you know, also I think quite a lot of what I do, where I'm most happy, is a kind of comedy that I don't think is necessarily on the page the kind of things that Americans would buy. They'd like it when they see it, but I'm not sure they like it enough to commission it. You know, I could imagine going to the try and pitch Doc Martin in America, and people not knowing what the hell.
But they think it's a type of shoe wear, do you think?
Exactly. And then, of course, once they've seen it, they love it. But, you know, it has a kind of charming British comedy that they love. But those things almost never originate in the US. Obviously, it's changing because of the streamers and all of that. But they find our comedy charming, but they wouldn't get it early enough in the process. I think I'm by and large better off here. Although having said that, you know, sometimes you have a commercial film idea, and if you are better placed in the, let me put it to you this way. On the TV side, I think when I was in LA doing Knightfall, there were in the UK something like 10 new drama series being made across all the channels and networks and new shows. In America, they were making, I think the count was 425.
What?
Drama series. Yeah, and it's just an order of magnitude of difference, So if you're serious about your career, probably you should relocate. But I'm here. I'm British.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, you use obviously come up with your own material a lot. Have you ever considered or seen anything you've thought's good enough from another novelist and considered purchasing it and turn it into a series, or is that not your style?
No, I've definitely bought rights and options in books, and there's something at the moment. There's always one or two books I'm looking at any one point. Like I say, I do find that inspiring, and someone's done a lot of the research and the work for you. It seems crazy not to look long and hard at that. I would say it's difficult unless you're a big player, and I at one point had a deal with the BBC where they helped me to invest in development, but that didn't, in the end I found that too heavy a responsibility. If you take people's money, you've got to show your homework, you've got to sit in board meetings, and I've been freelance all my life, and I like to be my own boss, and I found that a bit stifling. It's a massive compliment to be given money to help you find projects, but it's also a responsibility that in the end I'm quite happy not to have, except when I'm in production, when you have to bear the brunt, and then the rest of the time I want to be freer. But I would say a lot of the best material is often snapped up by hungry lions, and that's great for the writers of novels who find themselves, there's a bidding war for the rights for their books, although quite often then they find they get paid a good amount of money now with the promise of millions later, but those companies then don't know what to do with all the rights to all these books they're buying, and the excitement ebbs away and time moves on, and it looks like your book will never be made into a movie, and you wish you could get it back, but you can't because you took all that money. And so I found that's a market that's quite hard to play in unless you've got very deep pockets. So one of the best books seem to be often to be tied up before you even get near them. So it hasn't much worked for me, the adaptation thing. When Hamish Macbeth was a very loose adaptation of the books by MC Beaton, but by and large adaptation hasn't. I find myself working often on existing scripts, where there's a script with a pretty good idea, but it needs some fresh take and things like that. So I'm very rarely with a blank. Doc Martin was almost blank. It was Martin Clune's Dr. Cornwall, but no, usually there's something. I'm working with something, and I like working with somebody too, particularly if they've done the work, they've done the research, or they have a particular connection to the material, and that saves you a lot of time.
We normally talk to novelists mainly on this chat channel, and their highest aspiration is getting their work on screen. Do you still get a thrill of seeing the words that you wrote, up there on a screen, the actors saying the lines that you've written?
Yeah. Yes. I mean, look, if that didn't excite you, you would never stick at it. It's so hard. I think what's exciting is because often you look at it and think, oh, why did I do that? Or why did they do that? Why is there that thing in the back of the the frame that shouldn't be, you know, you're just picking holes in everything. But when a scene works, you know, or when a long art works, and you know, you, the audience, if you've done your job, has fallen in love with that character, and then you're going to kill her off, right? And you're crying as you write it, and you know the audience, if they get that far, they'll be crying too, and then you can get the production to deliver that, and the music and everything is working together. And yeah, of course, those are proud moments. You know, you'd have to be made of strange stuff if that didn't excite you. I think, you know, that there is, when you first get going, a sort of incredible thrill of just something you did in any shape or form, whether it's the words or some choice that you made, is then on screen. It's like, oh my God, I did that. Of course you'd be proud.
Yeah.
But then after a while, it's about, you know, actually, does it work, and is it emotionally impactful? Then yeah, of course, that's the game. That's what you're in the game for.
Yeah. Can you tell us what you're working on at the moment? Is there a new series or anything coming up, or is you sworn to secrecy at the moment? Or
I could I'll tell you 2 or 3 things I'm interested in. One is a movie about the girl who goes to work for Puccini, the composer, you know, who wrote Nessun Dorma, right?
yeah.
And it's actually the story of Nessun Dorma. What is that? Where does that passion come from? And it comes from this story true story about a girl who went to work for Puccini in 1903 in Tuscany, when he had become famous with his first big piece, which was La Boheme, and he'd become a superstar. And so the world was waiting for the next one, and he had writer's block. And he had a car because he got instantly rich. So he bought a car in 1903, and he had these mates who would go around with him, who were kind of hangers-on, you know, ne'er-do-wells, and they go out shooting and fishing and shagging. And he went out with the lads one night and rolled the car. And, you know, they didn't have lids in those days, and he broke his leg and it didn't heal. So he had writer's block and a gammy leg, but turned out he had diabetes and it wasn't going to heal. They had to break it and reset it and all that stuff. And so he had a miserable time, and his wife needed you know, someone to help care for him. So the girls from the village all came out, and she sent them all away. She knew what he was like. He had a reputation, right? And she sent them all away again. But this one girl who stayed became part of the family. It's her story, and it becomes like an opera in its own right. And it's an amazing true story. And I'd love to. I've written a screenplay for that, and I would love to make that film.
That sounds brilliant.
It is brilliant. It's hard to know how to, you know, Epitome wants to make it in Italian, which I don't speak fluently, but would be more authentic. So I don't know. I'm not bad at Italian, but I'm not fluent. And the problem with that is that then the market's smaller, right? So then your money is less to make. It's harder to make it. Or do you make it with an American actor speaking like this, saying I am Italian?
Yeah,
I don't know.
like Nicolas Cage in the film Set in Greece. The mandolin, Captain Corelli's mandolin.
Corelli's mandolin. Yeah. The thing about that was he wasn't trying to be Italian. He carried himself as an American, didn't he, with a kind of swagger.
Yeah.
I think it was the comportment that was wrong in that. But I hesitate to criticize it because it was directed by a very good friend of mine. It just didn't quite work, did it? I want to make a show in America, which is about Italian Americans in upstate New York, contemporary show, which is about sort of Ozarky, sort of The Sopranos with a good dose of Shameless, you know. So almost like making a British show in upstate New York, and I think I'm right for that, and I'm quite keen on that possibility. And I also am interested in there's an Italian theme here. No surprises. in telling the story of the Italian diaspora in the UK. So the Italians who came mostly to Scotland in the late 1800s, of which my family was a cohort, although we don't know much about our particular story because the people died young. And going through their sort of integration into the local communities, and particularly the Scottish Italians became very well embedded. And then, you know, First World War, fighting alongside British troops, and in between the wars, becoming real sort of pillars of the community. And then this disaster's happening, you know, sort of the slow rumble of, there's a guy back home who is getting the trains to run on time. He's actually quite a good guy. And
Mussolini.
yeah, and he thinks we should be proud of it, of our home country, instead of just running away from it. And we're ambassadors for our country now. And the Mussolini paid for sort of scout halls in the UK where they could get there, sort of have Italian clubs and make sure the kids kept their heritage and spoke, you know, had Italian lessons, and they would pay for their kids to go back to Italy once a year on a sort of scout trip, go camping. This was good. They were, because Italy was such abject poverty, they were really proud of their homeland, you know. And some of the wives were like, I'm not sure about that guy. You know, are you sure? You know, he seems quite sort of feisty. No, he's fine. He's just proud of our country. And then, of course, Mussolini aligns himself with Hitler. And that same day, there's a kind of crystal nut, you know, particularly in Scotland, but also in the rest of the UK, Italian fish and chip shops and delicatessens and restaurants, cafes were all smashed to pieces. Oh, yeah. And the next day, the local cops would come, and often they were, you know, mates of the Italian businessmen, and they would come and say, thank God you're here, because our business has been totally smashed up, you know, they've been rioting basically. They said, yeah, I'm here with someone from MI5, and we need to interview the men and the sons when you come down the station with us. And they took them away, and many of them were never seen again. They were put in kind of basically concentration camps on British soil. And then they were taken to, the story that I'm following, taken to Liverpool, yeah, and put on the Arandora Star, which you'll probably know about. Yeah. And the Arandora Star was a cruise ship that had been painted grey, and they put a couple of guns on the deck. Mm. So it was fair game. And there was a German U-boat captain, what do they call the captain of a submarine? Captain, I suppose.
Commandant.
Commandant, yes.
Yeah.
We had one torpedo left, and he saw the Arandora Star on its own with no convoy, and it had 700 Italians and some interned Germans on it, and fired his torpedo, and it sank, and most of them died. A lot of them died, and absolutely horrendous story, and not very well known. And I think it would be quite an interesting sort of timely piece.
When it's powerful, that.
Yeah, and I went to a conference about it at the end of last year, and there can be nobody there who had any direct connection with it anymore. You know, that I mean, my dad's still alive, and he could even have been on it if he'd been unlucky. In fact, he was called up in the British Army, but others were deemed to be, you know, on the list of people who needed to be rounded up. And by that point, the war was so imminent that they couldn't be bothered with asking whether you were, you know, what your sympathies were, and you were either rounded up or called up, and it was just pot luck. And but at that conference, there could have been nobody there who had any real direct connection with it, but the anger was absolutely palpable, and the shame. And I remember my mum, God bless her, she used to cross herself whenever she mentioned this thing. I didn't really know what it was about, but there was this awful thing that happened, and it wasn't talked about, because after the war, the Italians wanted to move on they didn't want to remind people that they had been at one point the enemy. They just wanted to forget about it and move on. But you know, if you've lost your husband and your sons, they were taken away for questioning and never seen again, and drowned.
Yeah,
drowned
awful.
on a, yeah, I mean, it was horrendous.
Yeah.
So it's still live, I think, in the sort of community of expat, you know, sort of Italian Brits.
Yeah.
And I think it's a really important piece of British history that is not well known.
Yeah.
And I think at a time when we're pushing migrants away and demonizing them, you know, when actually, you know, people are just people, you know, and so much of our, you know, I'm proud to be from a family that has contributed a lot to British culture. And, you know, we're not just in the media, but there are plenty of people in the media who, you know, Peter Capaldi and all kinds of interesting folk who are part of our British life. And that would be true of the migrants that we're demonizing now, and effectively pushing them into the water too. And so I think there's a story to be told there, but that on its own right stands up, but also is relevant to the kind of Britain we want to be and that we are at the moment. So those are things that I'm interested. I mean, and also I'm a prostitute. If a great idea comes my way with a check attached to it, I'm going to look at it. You know, it's
Dominic, I think again we're delighted that you're giving us this much time, which we didn't expect. Maybe could I ask you maybe a final question, unless Steve may have one.
Yeah.
Can I ask you? You mentioned earlier on about advice for would-be screenwriters. You advised having a look at as many scripts, learning at the format. What I've found is by reading screenplays, a good screenplay is as interesting to me as a good novel.
Yeah.
Have you ever tried your hand at novel writing away from the screenwriting?
I have a really big ambition to be a novelist. I would really like to do that. Whether or not I will, I find myself distracted by all kinds of things. And we haven't talked about it, and probably that's for another day, but I also like to bring, you'll have detected from what I just said about the Italian diaspora story, that I'm quite sort of politically minded. And so I'm spending a lot of my time at the moment trying to bring my experience in drama and storytelling to politics, to try and you know, make a difference in what I see as a very fraught time. But so whether or not I'll have the calmness of mind and focus that you need to really sit down and do it, but I would love to write a novel. But when I say that, I feel like everyone else who'd love to write a novel. You know, I don't feel like, you know, I suppose I have written things. So I do have some, you know, sort of skills to bring to the table, but writing a novel is a very different thing from writing a screenplay, or, you know, mostly dialogue, you know. I know that, and so I would be a bit frightened. I don't have a burning, I don't exactly know what my novel would be about, which I think is probably the reason why I've not given it the ambition, not too much space. But yeah, I would love to do it. And I'd love someone to say to me, "You're banned from screenwriting. You're not allowed. You're not allowed to do politics." No, great. I can go away and write my novel.
You know, the story you told us about the Italian, the internment. I think that would make a brilliant novel, with, you know, a factually based novel.
Yeah, well, actually, that's an example of some so I neglected to say that there are some novels that have inspired me, written by someone called Mary Contini. So I think my instinct is to, you know, work from her novels. And so that's what I'm doing at the moment, working with her on that story.
Okay.
Yeah. so I probably won't be writing that into a novel because it's already a novel.
Fair enough.
But although I think it is true that I think the story of my own family, which is different from the story that she's written, could be something I would look into. But and it might be that telling the story, I mean, this is the story mostly of Mary's family and the family behind the well-known deli in Edinburgh called Valvona and Crolla, which has been there since 1910 or something, and was one of the businesses that was smashed up and they lost loved ones. And it could be that might exhaust that might sort of satisfy my desire to tell the story of Italian Brits, or it might just fire me up. I don't know.
Yeah.
Would you watch that if it was a series on the?
Definitely, yeah. You got me hooked already. Yep.
Yes, yeah, definitely. Not only from me, of all your successes, which one is you're most proud of? Do you think the best in your eyes? And then there's a lot there to pick from, I know, but wow, I don't know where I'd start.
Well, you're very kind. You know, you always think you've never done enough. I'll tell you something that's happened recently is, I mean, I'm proud of silly little things. Like I'm really proud of getting Andy Serkis to dress up as Mrs. May in a 2-minute film that I made.
Like the Brexit film.
Yeah. But one thing that's happened recently is I think they put Robin Hood on BritBox or something. It sort of revived a little bit. It's a show I made in 2006.
Would you get royalties from that? Additional?
Bloody hope so. If not, I'm going to go and break some, I'm going to start firing some arrows at people. It's got quite a good following on Instagram or social media, and there are people who sort of analyze the scripts and you know, or analyze a scene and say, you know, well, what's happening here is, you know, he's feeling this, but he's, you know, if you look at the sort of thematic arc of that, you know, it comes back in episode 7 and sort of proper nerds analyzing what you've done. And actually, they're mostly right. They can see my sort of inner workings, and that's quite pleasing. And so people do appreciate the depth and effort of your endeavor. But also, since you asked me what I'm proud of, some of the stuff makes me laugh. Some of my own jokes, you know, 20 years later, are making me laugh. And I think in a way, what was weird about that show was, obviously it was a comedy. And I'm not sure that at the time, people really understood that it was a comedy. Even though, when you look back and, you know, Keith Allen is hamming it up big time as the sheriff with just, you know, line after panto line of, you know, sort of catchphrases and, you know, it was a full-on comedy. And I think people were sort of, hang on, that's not quite true. This isn't true. And they didn't have clocks in 1173, you know, all kinds of people really just didn't quite, I mean, lots of people did, but there was a kind of sort of slightly snooty resistance to it. I think that was predicated on wanting it to be a more serious show, or feeling it was a more serious show than it was ever intended to be. And now it feels as though, at least in its following on social media, people really get it. And so I can't work out whether I'm proud of the hard work or whether just enjoying seeing some funny old lines, beautifully acted. People like Sam Troughton and lovely Lucy Griffiths, and who's gone on to have quite a good career in America, and Richard Armitage, absolutely brilliant actor. And I've been lucky, I've had really good casting, as you touched on yourselves, you know, all those brilliant actors in Doc Martin that we had, Ian Neese and Caroline Katz, and obviously Martin Clunes, and Lucy Punch and Selena Cadell, and just incredible. Been really lucky, because without, you know, you can't do anything, you can't do nothing without the right people to speak the words and inhabit the characters. You're wasting your time. So I just, you know, a lot of my good fortune has been down to good casting. You just have to acknowledge that. I do think that you know, writers are closet actors, really. I mean, you should ask the other writers that you talk to in your series. But I think we're people, maybe writers are ugly actors, you know, in that we're not pretty enough to go in front of the camera.
Yeah.
But actually, we do know the magic that they do, you know, and we rely upon it.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Dominic, I think our time's caught up with us, but it's been
Thank
really
you very much. It's been so nice talking to you.
I've thoroughly enjoyed it. I could chat to you for hours. I really could. But I really appreciate your time, and thank you very much.
Yeah,
Thanks,
thank you so
Terry.
much.
Thanks,
It's been
Steve.
so interesting. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
Great
yeah.
fun talking.